Weekly photos. 2022, May 23rd, Monday, 361 photos. To pull Tim Cast today.
I think it's happening.
It's always possible. Probable? I don't know. I think I tend towards Magic Nawaz making a statement about World War III, that it would be a bunch of civil wars as well as a global war, corporate war, neighbors on neighbors, information, all of it.
Let me tell you why I think it's happening. It's inevitable.
Take my bike.
You need to understand what it means in the context of fourth and fifth generational warfare we often bring up.
I knew him.
It may not get to the point where people are fighting in the streets. It may just be what we're experiencing: information warfare, lawfare, media manipulation.
Memes world.
In this modern era, do we need nuclear weapons when you have the power of propaganda?
Well, when I say civil war, I mean violence. I mean,
it's already happening.
To some extent. I mean, organized violence, and not just Antifa rioters smashing up buildings and beating people up, not just psychopaths randomly shooting at people. I mean, organized violence.
National Guard, a governmental body.
Yes, and I vacillate on this, right? Sometime when I grew up, it seemed pretty inevitable, right? And then in the 90s, it seemed pretty inevitable that the country was going to break apart. There was so much hatred in the air, so much violence. That was pretty much stamped out by the response to 9/11, and all of that sort of foment was pushed down by the fear of the NSA or DHS picking you off, and it just went cold. Now it's starting to get hot again, and I don't really see who would be the combatants in a clear way, right? You could say, oh, it's going to be conservatives and liberals. It's going to be the urban versus the rural. What would that Civil War map actually look like? I did get an insight on that, though, when I think it was NBC published a map of which states would pull back abortion rights and which ones wouldn't. And I'm not saying that's a clear map of what the battle lines would look like in the Civil War, but I think that's a pretty good indication because you've got a sacred value there, and I think that's what's pretty much behind most of this conflict is sacred values.
I think it's going to be fairly north and south. I mean, for the most part, we're seeing abortion laws, like it's northern and western states that are pro-abortion to an extreme degree. Colorado, for instance, no restrictions. And it's many of the southern states that are trying to implement restrictions on it. So you may actually end up seeing this. I'll reference the meme where it says the United States of Canada and what was it? What was the other one? The South was called like the Christian States of America, and then the North was the United States of Canada, and it was like California, but then up and around like Nevada, and then the Midwest. What people need to understand about the first Civil War, Texas, my understanding, joined just because of geography. Texas was like, well, we're basically locked in next to the Confederacy, and if we don't join them, what happens? Who do we trade with? How does this work if we're a U.S. state or whatever? So then basically, like, by virtue of geography, we're joining this new union or whatever. I think the same thing would happen. You will see more conservative states that don't want to align with Illinois, New York, and California, but be like, what choice do we have? North Dakota and South Dakota will probably be roped up. Whether they want to or not, their populations are so small they may not have a choice. That could split the country. Honestly, I don't really know all too well exactly how to predict what would happen. Civil wars like the U.S. Civil War are rare. In fact, I'm not sure there have been other civil wars exactly like it where multiple jurisdictions split between North and South. The Spanish Civil War, for instance, was pockets of urban and rural areas. So we may actually just see that. And you will see, I mean, New York's got a massive urban police force. Tens of thousands of people. But I think what people, what you need to understand right now about what's going on is geographic hyperpolarization is happening and will be exacerbated by the Supreme Court's ruling on Roe v. Wade and Casey. You're going to get, as you already are, conservatives in liberal areas fleeing, red states becoming redder, blue states becoming bluer, and then eventually we just completely disagree on everything, refuse to cooperate, and then what happens when Nevada puts up a border between California or something because they're like, you allow illegal immigrants, we don't, so we're building a border between states. These are the kind of things that precipitate major conflict. Or how about monkeypox? It spreads, and then all of a sudden one state says we're enacting border checkpoints between states so we can keep out certain illnesses, like we saw with COVID, actually, with Connecticut and New York.
I love that.
You guys are big on Jonathan Haidt's moral foundation.
Oh, yeah.
I've heard you talk about it, and let's just take his theory for granted, right? That human societies evolved so that they diversify naturally towards a conservative leaning and a liberal leaning. The conservatives obviously are holding down the traditions. Liberals are pushing society forward, and it's through that symbiosis that society goes forward, right?
Forward isn't the right word.
When I say forward, I mean in a more adaptive direction, right? So according to Haidt's theory, what you're talking about is humanity essentially as certain pockets of superorganisms in which having that variety, having the variety of foundations to draw from in any given problem, to face any given dilemma, you have a much greater chance of solving it because of this diversity of perspective, right? If we take that for granted, what's happening now with this big sword in the U.S. and what's been happening really for decades, but in the last 10 years it's been extreme. In his theory, you're basically peeling the human organism apart. You're creating